Jean looked out of the cube to summon. Maybe if this one wasn't wearing any jeans but had really itchy legs. Jean suggested. Rogue suddenly saw small plumes of smoke appearing at her ankles where her restraints were. Then she saw Hypnotic moved into eye contact and Rogue had a buzzing once more in her head. Then the tops of her legs burned with an itching sensation. Much better. Jean laughed. Rogue began to thrash her legs about trying to drive the itching sensation away. She began to spread the contents of her underwear around so much that her knees were becoming covered in the muck. Jean just stood over Rogue, her hands on her hips watching as Rogue thrashed and squirmed helpless to stop. Hypnotic looked at Rogue again and the itching suddenly stopped. Rogue allowed her legs to settle and rest back down onto the ruined changing pad. Jean began to run her hands down Rogue's shirt. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It appears that we have got our shirt a little smelly as well as our panties. Doesn't it, Rogue? Rogue could do nothing but start to cry and nod slowly. Don't cry, all babies ruin their clothes, that's why diapers are the only option, for you. Jean smiled as Rogue cried harder. Taking a pair of brilliant white disposables, Jean moved her hand to the only clean bit of Rogue's pants and drew them slowly, deliberately over her legs. Rogue was mortified by these events. She had experienced Madeline's emotions of having to do this to herself, but these emotions were her own and she hated them. This was humiliation, this was all of her adult privileges stripped from her and placed in the diaper pail with the rest of the garbage. Every baby wipe that Jean used on her caused Rogue to cry louder, and eventually her bawling was so loud that Hypnotic had to mute all of the sounds Rogue made altogether. As she drew the extra thick pull-up style diaper up to Rogue's waist, Jean found that Rogue was trembling with anticipation. Rogue found her helplessness so infuriating that she was shaking with the anger coursing through her veins. Now it's time for plastic pants. They help keep your messes in your diapers even if you thrash about like that all the time. Jean explained to Rogue's horror. Rogue clearly hadn't planned on using more than one diaper whilst she was in captivity. Taking the Onacy, Jean draped it over Rogue and Summon did the rest. Jean then took a pacifier which had a black mask which covered Rogue's nose and eyes and dropped it in Rogue's mouth. It looks so cute the way your pacifier moves up and down when you cry, baby Rogue. Jean exclaimed. Why don't you poop your diaper more often? What about once every 20 minutes, the same as Madeline? Madeline burst into loud sobs in the other cube. See, Rogue, you should be just like Madeline, she is missing you already. Jean said as the both disappeared. Rogue reappeared in the cube and was almost buried in an avalanche of baby toys that landed on top of her. Jean reappeared in front of Hypnotic and Summon, now time wearing a French maid's uniform. Hypnotic moved to the cube and walked round it. Madeline and Rogue sat in their corners monitoring her. They both had venom in their eyes and Hypnotic knew that she had to install a command that would make them forget this ordeal, well, almost forget it. They would just remember what Jean had done to them.